The clatter of that shattered plate was still ringing in my ears when I looked up and saw the hatred in my daughter-in-law's eyes. Still, I didn't move, just brushed a shard off the table as if her rage couldn't cut me deeper than the china. As the sharp edges caught the dining room light, they reminded me how long I'd ignored the cracks forming in this family. While everyone else froze, that same ringing in my ears grew heavier, like a truth I'd refused to hear. The same sound carried my realization. She hadn't just broken a plate, she'd broken whatever respect she pretended to have for me. That's when I decided silence would be my weapon, because some betrayals deserve consequences far colder than any holiday dinner. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Henry Clark moved through his kitchen with the steady, deliberate rhythm of a man who had been doing this for decades. The aroma of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and sweet potatoes glazed with brown sugar filled the warm California home. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, checking the table settings one last time. Every fork aligned, every glass polished, every plate placed exactly where Maggie wanted it. It wasn't just a meal to Henry. It was tradition, the last thread tying his family together the way it used to be. As he stepped back to admire the long oak dining table, sunlight filtered through the window in the kind of gentle golden tone he remembered from Thanksgivings when his kids were small. It made the house feel full again, even though the silence was loud enough to remind him of how much things had changed. He'd hosted Thanksgiving for nearly 45 years. Back then, laughter echoed through the house, and little feet pattered across the floors as the kids tried to sneak tastes of pie. Now, the joy felt distant, replaced by a carefulness among his grown children, as if everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. He rubbed his fingers across the back of a dining chair and couldn't help wondering when exactly the shift had happened. Maybe it was when the kids got married. Maybe it was when Olivia joined the family. Or maybe it was when he started feeling less like a father and more like an obligation. Those thoughts lingered as the sound of a car door shutting snapped him back to the present. Henry took a deep breath before heading to the front door. Tim and Olivia stood on the porch, their 4-year-old son tugging at Tim's hand. Tim managed a small smile, but Olivia didn't bother. Her eyes slid past Henry as if she were already exhausted just being there. Henry greeted them with warmth anyway, choosing hope over reality, the way he always did. Inside, the tension arrived with them, subtle but unmistakable. Henry felt it in the rigid way Olivia walked into the living room, the quick, silent exchanges between her and Tim. He noticed it in the way she glanced at the table settings, not with appreciation but with a quiet, biting judgment. Still, he pushed on, offering drinks, asking about their drive, commenting on how big their son was getting. His words floated in the air, unanswered or dismissed with a shrug. When the rest of the family finally gathered around the table, Henry tried to pretend everything was fine. Maggie brought out the last dish, and Caroline pulled out a chair, trying to lighten the mood with small talk. But Olivia's behavior grew sharper with each passing minute. Her remarks were coated in sarcasm, so thin it barely masked the bitterness beneath. Henry tried to ignore it at first. He commented on how good the turkey looked, and Olivia smirked, muttering something about how it would have been better if someone didn't overcook it like always. A few awkward chuckles followed, though no one really laughed. Henry kept his smile in place, but inside something stung, not just the insult, but the casualness with which she delivered it. The conversation shifted to family matters, the kind of easy talk Henry had once loved. But today, every sentence felt like a subtle reminder that the world was moving on without him. Olivia dominated the conversation, speaking over him, dismissing his suggestions, making it clear that she preferred the way things were done in her own house. Each jab was soft enough to pass as ordinary conversation, but pointed enough that Henry felt them land. And then came the comment that lodged itself deep. Olivia mentioned how everything always needs to be done the way she wants, her tone dripping with disdain as she looked at Henry. It was phrased like a joke, a light tease, but the emphasis told another story. It wasn't a joke, it was a message. Henry's grip tightened around the edge of the tablecloth. For a moment he wondered if anyone else heard it the way he did. Maggie's eyes dropped to her plate. Caroline pretended to fix her napkin. Tim stared straight ahead. Everyone heard it, no one said a word. Still, Henry forced himself to breathe, to smile politely, to keep the peace the way he always did. He reminded himself that it was Thanksgiving, that he wouldn't let tension ruin a day he cherished. But as everyone began to sit down, plates clattering and chairs scraping against the floor, Henry felt something else settle over the table. A heaviness, a warning. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was unmistakable, a quiet sense that something, somewhere beneath the surface, was shifting toward the inevitable. He didn't know what was coming, but he could feel it, and it was getting closer. Dinner began with the soft clatter of silverware and the kind of forced politeness families use when they're pretending everything is fine. Henry watched Olivia from across the table, noticing how she never once lifted her eyes toward him. She sat rigidly, shoulders squared, her expression a blend of irritation and something colder, resentment maybe. Whatever it was, it pressed heavily on the air between them. Trying to bridge that space, Henry leaned slightly forward and offered what he hoped was a warm smile. He asked her how the sweet potatoes turned out, hoping to nudge the evening toward civility. Olivia didn't miss a beat. Without looking at him, she muttered something about how, at least the sweet potatoes aren't overcooked like the turkey. It landed like a slap, sharp, unnecessary, humiliating. Henry swallowed the sting and forced a chuckle, even though the remark had drained the room of warmth. Tim, sitting beside his wife, noticed the tension and jumped in with a half-hearted joke about how every Thanksgiving turkey in the country was probably overcooked. But the attempt backfired. Olivia shot him a look, and Tim instantly fell silent, his shoulders curling inward. It was clear he didn't have the strength or will to referee tonight's battle. Henry could see the stress etched into his son's face, and for a brief moment he felt sorry for him, caught between a father trying to hold onto tradition and a wife determined to reject it. Henry tried again, commenting softly on the cranberry sauce and how Maggie had followed an old family recipe. But even that simple gesture drew another cutting response from Olivia. This time she smirked and murmured, "Of course she did. Everything in this house always has to be done a certain way." Her tone was sweet enough to pass as casual, but her eyes were icy, daring Henry to challenge her. The remark hit its target. Henry felt something inside him tighten, not anger, at least not yet, but a sense of being pushed aside in his own home. He had spent decades trying to build a family rooted in closeness and shared tradition. But moments like this made him feel like he had become an outsider, someone whose presence irritated more than it comforted. The conversation meandered into safer territory until Olivia abruptly shifted gears. She turned toward Jacob and started discussing bills and upcoming expenses. It wasn't a private conversation. She made sure the whole table heard every word. Henry kept his focus on his plate, but the second Olivia began talking about money, his name came up. She accused him, not loudly but clearly enough, of being selfish with his finances, of not helping when it actually matters. Her voice was coated with disdain, and the accusation hung in the air like smoke. Jacob looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. Maggie froze mid-bite. Caroline's fork paused halfway to her mouth, and Henry, he didn't look up, but the words hit him hard, their cruelty cutting deeper than Olivia realized. Or maybe she did realize. Maybe that was the point. Maggie tried to rescue the moment by gently steering the conversation toward holiday plans, but even her voice was strained, thin around the edges. She wore a small, polite smile, but Henry could see the worry behind it, worry for him, for the family, for what this dinner was turning into. But the evening hadn't bottomed out yet. It happened when Henry finally attempted to explain himself, to softly remind Olivia that he wasn't trying to take anything away from anyone. Before he could finish, Olivia leaned forward, her expression sharpening. She accused him directly this time of trying to control everything. The menu, the traditions, the conversations, the family's choices. Her voice didn't rise, but its precision was cutting. She told him he didn't respect her, that he never had, and that he treated her like an outsider who didn't belong at his precious family table. The room went silent, not quiet silent. Even the sound of forks scraping against plates stopped. Henry's breath caught. He felt Maggie's hand rest lightly against his arm, but he didn't look at her. He couldn't tear his gaze from Olivia, not because he wanted to argue, but because he was stunned by what he saw there. Not anger, not frustration. Conviction. She meant every word. And as the silence deepened around them, Henry realized something unsettling. The night wasn't done unraveling yet. The meal had become a quiet battlefield. Every clink of silverware sounded sharp, every breath strained, every glance loaded with tension. Henry tried to steady himself, focusing on the simple motions of cutting his turkey, chewing slowly, keeping his voice even whenever he spoke. But the tension had grown into something thick, something impossible to ignore, and Olivia was sitting at the center of it, simmering. It happened so quickly that Henry almost didn't register the moment at first. Olivia placed her fork down with a deliberate, metallic tap. Then, without warning, she pushed her chair back and rose to her feet. The sudden motion startled everyone, and Henry looked up, confused. Her voice cut through the room like a blade. "You're selfish, Henry. You won't even let me and Jacob host Thanksgiving next year." The accusation hit him square in the chest. He blinked, stunned, aware of every pair of eyes at the table shifting toward him. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. Selfish. The word felt foreign, something no one in his family had ever thrown at him before. Henry's throat tightened. "Olivia, it's not about not letting you host. It's just," he paused, feeling his voice waver. "It's family tradition. We've always gathered here. I just want us to keep celebrating together. That's all." But Olivia wasn't listening. Her face had flushed red, her breath quick and sharp. This wasn't irritation, it was rage, years of resentment boiling over all at once. "You just want control," she snapped. "You want everything done your way, every Thanksgiving, every holiday, every decision. You act like you own this family." Henry opened his mouth to speak, but before a single word left his lips, Olivia grabbed her dinner plate, full of turkey, stuffing, and gravy, and hurled it across the table. It struck the edge near Henry, shattering loudly and spraying food across his shirt, the tablecloth, and the floor beneath him. Maggie gasped. Caroline slapped a hand over her mouth. Tim froze. Jacob jumped from his seat, eyes wide with shock. The room stopped breathing. Olivia's voice broke through the horror, raw and venomous. "You're selfish, Henry. You've been selfish since the day I married Jacob. You think you can control us, our home, our marriage, our lives. Well, I'm done with it." Jacob reached for her arm, trying to pull her back. "Liv, stop. Please, just calm down." But Olivia ripped her arm free, eyes still locked on Henry as if no one else existed. Her chest heaved with every breath, and for the first time, Henry wasn't angry, he was shattered. The woman he had tried for years to welcome into his family was staring at him like he was the enemy. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even swallow. His throat burned, his hands trembled, and every bit of warmth he'd felt that morning, every hope of a peaceful Thanksgiving, collapsed. Tim finally stood, voice shaky. "Olivia, enough, please." But the damage wasn't just done, it was irreversible. Henry pushed his chair back slowly. The legs scraped against the floor with a long, painful groan. He didn't look at Olivia or the shattered plate or the food dripping onto the rug. He couldn't. Instead, he rose to his feet like a man suddenly much older than 70, his shoulders curled inward. Without a word, he turned and walked toward the kitchen. The silence he left behind was suffocating. In the kitchen, the world felt smaller, quieter. He braced himself against the counter, his breath trembling as he tried to steady the shaking in his hands. The scent of the food he'd spent hours preparing now made him sick. He stared at the running faucet, letting its sound drown out the echo of Olivia's words. Selfish, controlling, unwanted. Caroline appeared in the doorway a moment later, her expression torn with worry. "Dad, are you okay? I don't know what's gotten into her." Henry shook his head, barely able to speak. "It doesn't matter," he whispered. "It's done." Caroline took a hesitant step forward as if to comfort him, but before she could say anything else, Olivia's voice erupted from the dining room again, furious, uncontained. Then came the sound of her chair slamming against the floor. Moments later, Olivia stormed past the kitchen, yanking her coat off the hook and heading straight for the front door. Jacob followed behind her, pleading, but she didn't stop. She slammed the door so hard the walls shook. And just like that, the evening unraveled completely. Tim drifted into the kitchen, defeated, shoulders sagging. He looked at Henry the way a son looks at a father he no longer knows how to help. Henry tried to speak, but the words wouldn't form. There was just too much hurt. The night didn't end with apologies or understanding. It ended with shards of a broken plate on the floor, a family splintered, and a wound Henry had no idea how to recover from. And deep in his chest, he felt something shifting, the first crack of a break that would not be easily repaired. Henry remained in the kitchen long after the front door slammed, long after Olivia's footsteps had faded from the porch. He sat at the small breakfast nook, hands clasped tightly together, staring at the floor as if the scattered crumbs and faint gravy stains could explain what had just happened. But nothing made sense. Her words kept looping in his mind, selfish, controlling, outsider, each replay sharper than the last. He had always tried to give his family the best of him, even when he didn't know how. And now, it felt like all those years had been twisted into something ugly. Tim stepped into the kitchen cautiously, like a man approaching a wounded animal. He didn't sit right away. He just stood across from his father, rubbing the back of his neck, looking 10 years older than he had that morning. "Dad, I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over the hum of the refrigerator. Henry didn't answer at first. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes were tired, hollow. "I don't even know what I did, Tim," he said quietly. "I thought I was doing what I've always done, hosting, keeping family together." His voice cracked and he swallowed hard. "When did that become a crime?" Tim slid into the chair across from him, elbows on the table. "I don't think it's a crime," he said. I think Liv sees things differently. I tried talking to her outside. I asked her to come in, apologize, just talk, but she wouldn't." He exhaled sharply and rubbed his forehead. "She said you've been controlling for years, that you never respected her, that you make her feel like she doesn't belong in this family." Henry closed his eyes. The words landed like blows. "I never meant to make her feel that way," he murmured. I thought I was welcoming her." Tim didn't respond, and the silence between them said more than any explanation could. They were two men sitting in the same room, both carrying guilt neither knew how to unpack. Tim looked torn, the son caught between the father who raised him and the wife he loved. Henry could see the strain in his face, the impossible choice forming between blood and marriage. Maggie entered the kitchen quietly, her expression tight with worry. Without speaking, she placed a gentle hand on Henry's shoulder and squeezed. He leaned into her touch but didn't look up. He was afraid that if he met her eyes, the dam inside him would break completely. Maggie knelt beside him, brushing some gravy off his shirt, her movements soft, tender, but he could feel the hurt beneath them. "I don't know how we fix this," she whispered. "I don't even know where to begin." She looked between Tim and Henry, her voice trembling. "Thanksgiving was supposed to bring us together." Tim dropped his gaze, unable to offer reassurance because he didn't have any to give. Caroline appeared next, lingering in the doorway. Her face was flushed, partly from trying to clean up the mess in the dining room, partly from the emotional toll of the night. She stepped closer, eyes filled with sympathy. "Dad, I can talk to Olivia," she offered, though her tone lacked conviction. "I can try to calm her down. maybe help her see things differently. Henry lifted his head, searching her expression. "You shouldn't have to," he said softly. "This isn't your burden." Caroline sighed and took the seat next to him. "Maybe not, but I'm tired, Dad. We all are. This tension has been building for years. Tonight wasn't the beginning, it was the explosion." Her honesty cut deep, but Henry knew she wasn't wrong. The tension hadn't sprung up out of nowhere. There had been signs, small disagreements, subtle dismissals, unspoken resentment. He had noticed them, sure, but he had brushed them aside, convinced they were temporary, normal, fixable. Now he wasn't so sure. Tim leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "Dad, do you think things can go back to normal with Liv after this?" Henry didn't answer right away. He looked around the kitchen, the dishes Maggie still had to wash, the leftover food they hadn't touched, the gravy splattered across his shirt. Everything felt wrong now, tainted. Finally, he let out a slow breath. "I don't know," he admitted. "I honestly don't know if she'll ever see me differently. Maybe I held on too tightly to tradition. Maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I didn't try to understand her." The words tasted bitter, painful, necessary. No one spoke after that. The kitchen sat in a heavy, suffocating silence, broken only by the distant hum of the dishwasher Maggie had switched on earlier. Henry stared at the cold tile floor, wondering when everything had shifted so drastically, and fearing that the worst of it still lay ahead. The morning after the disastrous Thanksgiving felt unnaturally quiet, as if the entire house had been drained of sound. No one spoke during breakfast. Chairs scraped softly, spoons clinked against bowls, but not a single conversation formed. The air hung heavy with the memory of shattered porcelain and harsher words. Even the sunlight creeping through the kitchen blinds felt dimmer, reluctant to touch a family so fractured. Henry sat at the table, staring into his untouched coffee. His shirt was clean, but he still felt the weight of last night's stains, the humiliation, the anger, the ache of being seen as a problem rather than part of the family he'd built. Every time he blinked, he saw Olivia's eyes blazing with resentment. Every time he inhaled, he felt the heaviness of words he wished he could unhear. Caroline eventually broke the silence. She approached Henry gently, pulling out the chair beside him as if afraid her movement might cause another fracture. "Dad," she said softly, "can we talk?" Henry nodded, still not trusting his voice. His hand trembled slightly as he set the coffee mug aside, turning toward her. Caroline studied him, her brows tight with concern. "I know last night was awful, and Olivia was out of line. No one should talk to you like that." Henry let out a long, weary breath. "I don't understand her, Caroline," he admitted. "I feel like no matter what I do, she sees me as the enemy. I try to keep this family together." His voice cracked, revealing a vulnerability he rarely showed. "And somehow I've become the one pushing everyone apart." Caroline reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Dad, you're not the enemy, but you've also been hard to approach sometimes. You have strong opinions about how things should be. Most of the time it's out of love, but it can come across as," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "controlling, especially to someone like Olivia who already feels insecure around us." Henry stiffened at the word, control. The same accusation Olivia hurled at him last night, but hearing it from Caroline, gentle, honest, compassionate, made it hit differently. He felt the guilt rise in his chest like a slow burn. "I didn't mean to make her feel unwelcome," he whispered. "I just wanted us to stay close. I wanted traditions to mean something." Caroline nodded. "I know, but sometimes love requires flexibility too. Maybe none of us realized how much Olivia needed to feel included, not instructed." Henry leaned back, rubbing his temples. The guilt deepened. He could see now how he'd dismissed her suggestions at past gatherings, how he'd insisted that this is how we've always done it, how he'd taken offense when she tried to add her own ideas. Maybe he hadn't been cruel, but he also hadn't been listening. He wasn't the only one struggling, though. In the living room, Tim paced restlessly, phone in hand. Olivia hadn't come back inside after storming out last night. She'd driven off with Jacob trailing behind her. And though they'd texted Tim briefly, their messages were clipped, distant. Tim looked like a man split down the middle, loyalty heavy on one side, obligation on the other. "Did she say anything?" Maggie asked him from the doorway. Tim shook his head. "Just that she doesn't want to talk right now, she needs space." He paused, his shoulders sagging. "She says Dad has never respected her, and she's not ready to apologize." Henry heard every word, even though they weren't directed at him. He felt the sting again, sharper this time, because now it wasn't shouted in anger but spoken in quiet conviction. Maggie sat beside him a few minutes later, offering a small but tired smile. "Maybe we should think about getting help," she said. "Family counseling, mediation, something." Henry's first instinct was to reject the idea. Counseling felt like admitting failure. It felt like acknowledging that a family he had poured his life into was now beyond his ability to hold together. "I don't know if that's necessary," he murmured, "or if it would even fix anything." But Maggie didn't back down. "Honey, we can't keep pretending this will fix itself." Her voice was soft but certain. "Something has to change for all of us." Henry swallowed, his throat tight. Change, compromise, words he wasn't sure he was ready to face. All night and morning he'd clung to the belief that he was the wronged one, the wounded one. And yet beneath the hurt he felt a small, unsettling shift, a realization that he wasn't blameless. Caroline watched him silently, waiting, hoping he'd see the truth she saw. Henry finally stood, moving to the window. He stared outside at the quiet street, the leaves scattered across the pavement. The world outside seemed so simple compared to the storm in his home. "I want to fix this," he said quietly, "but I don't know how without giving up parts of myself." His voice wavered. "I don't know if I can compromise everything I value just to keep the peace." The room remained still. No answers came. No one spoke. Because they all knew the hardest decisions were the ones that forced you to question who you really were. And Henry felt that question rising slowly, heavily, leaving behind an uncertainty that would not be ignored. Henry had never been good at letting things sit unresolved. Even as a child, the idea of a lingering argument gnawed at him until he eventually caved and tried to fix it. Now, at 70 years old, that instinct hadn't changed. What had happened on Thanksgiving replayed in his mind so vividly it felt like it had happened minutes ago. Olivia's words, her fury, the plate shattering, none of it would leave him. And the longer he sat with it, the heavier it became. So that afternoon, after pacing the living room for what felt like an hour, Henry made a decision. He picked up his phone, opened Olivia's contact, and typed a simple message. "Can we talk, just you and me, whenever you're ready?" He stared at the screen before sending it, knowing there was a chance she wouldn't respond at all. But a few minutes later his phone buzzed. Olivia's reply was short, blunt, and cautious. "Fine, 30 minutes, I'll come by." It wasn't warm, but it wasn't a rejection either. When Olivia arrived, she stood stiffly in the doorway, arms folded, jaw tight. She didn't remove her coat, and her eyes scanned the room as though checking for witnesses. Henry motioned toward the kitchen table, neutral ground, he hoped, and she hesitated before finally sitting. Henry took a slow breath, hands clasped together on the table. "Olivia," he began quietly, "I want to start by saying I'm sorry. If I've done anything, intentionally or unintentionally, that made you feel disrespected, I need you to know that wasn't my intention." Olivia exhaled sharply, her shoulders rising and falling. Her defensiveness was visible in every small motion, tight lips, tapping fingers, eyes fixed on the table rather than on him. "I don't know what you want me to say, Henry," she muttered. "I'm still angry. I'm not pretending I'm not." "You don't have to pretend," Henry said gently. "I just want to understand." For the first time her eyes lifted to meet his, and behind the anger there was something softer, something tired. It's not just Thanksgiving, she said, her voice cracking at the edges. It's everything. For years, Henry, since Jacob and I got married, I've felt like I had to prove I belonged in this family, and nothing I did was ever good enough. You always had a way you wanted things done, your way. And whenever I tried to suggest something different, you made it seem like I was ruining tradition. Henry's brows drew together as he listened. He didn't interrupt, not this time. He let her speak, even when the words stung. You never made space for me, Olivia continued, her voice trembling with truth rather than rage now. I felt like an outsider every time we came here, like you tolerated me because you had to, not because you wanted to. And Jacob, he always told me to just accept it. That dad set in his ways. But how long am I supposed to live like that? Henry swallowed hard. Her honesty hurt in a way that was different from her shouting. This wasn't an attack, it was a confession. A wound she'd carried for years, finally bursting open. He leaned back slowly, feeling the years pressing down on him. I didn't realize, he whispered. I truly didn't. I thought keeping things the same made us feel connected. I didn't see how it might make you feel shut out. Olivia blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears she clearly didn't want him to see. You never listened, she said softly. Not really. And every year, every holiday, it just built up. Henry nodded, guilt rolling through him like a tide. She wasn't wrong. Tradition had become a shield for him, something to cling to after friends passed away, after retirement left him feeling purposeless. He'd held on so tightly that he hadn't realized others felt squeezed by it. I'm sorry, he said again, this time with a deeper weight. I should have tried harder to see things from your side. Olivia's shoulders eased a fraction, though tension still lingered in her posture. I'm not saying everything you did was wrong, she murmured. I know family matters to you. I know traditions matter. But I needed space to be myself, not just another extension of your rules. Henry nodded. I understand, or I'm trying to. A quiet settled between them, not hostile but raw, honest. Olivia wiped at the corner of her eye quickly, as though embarrassed to show any vulnerability. I need time, she said finally. I'm still upset. I'm not ready to pretend we're fine, but maybe we can rethink how we're doing things. Maybe after some space we can try again. Henry felt both relief and apprehension. Her words weren't a promise, but they weren't the end either. Okay, he said gently. We can take a break, and when you're ready, we'll talk again. Olivia nodded slowly, rising from her chair. That's all I can offer right now. She walked toward the door, pausing only once to look back at him, her expression torn between lingering hurt and a faint flicker of possibility. And as she stepped outside, Henry felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones. He had reached out, she hadn't forgiven him, but she hadn't shut the door either. For the first time since Thanksgiving, hope and uncertainty felt equally matched. And Henry knew the real work was only just beginning. The next morning carried none of the fragile hope Henry had felt after speaking with Olivia. Instead, the house felt tense again, as if another storm were already forming. He stood in the kitchen, staring out the window with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He didn't hear Tim walk in until his son spoke, his voice low but tight. Dad, we need to talk. Henry turned slowly. Tim stood a few feet away, arms crossed, jaw clenched, not angry exactly, but worn down, the way a man looks when he's been carrying too much for too long. Henry braced himself. What's on your mind, son? He asked, keeping his tone as calm as he could. Tim didn't ease into it. This situation, what happened on Thanksgiving, what happened last night, all of it. He dragged a hand through his hair and let out a shaky breath. It's gotten out of control. Henry felt himself tense. I know it's been hard, Tim, but I'm trying. No, Tim cut in. Dad, please just listen for once. The words stunned Henry into silence. Tim rarely raised his voice. The hurt behind it did more damage than the volume. Tim stepped closer, leaning on the counter as if he needed support just to say what came next. I get why Thanksgiving matters to you. I get why traditions matter. You've told us our whole lives. But you have to understand something. Olivia feels like she's been pushed to the sidelines since the day she married into this family. She feels like she isn't seen or heard. Henry swallowed, fighting the sting creeping up the back of his throat. Tim, I've never wanted her to feel that way. I've always tried. But Dad, Tim interrupted again, softer this time but still firm, you haven't tried in the ways she needed. You tried in your ways. You tried by insisting things stay the same. You tried by holding on so tight that no one else could breathe. The words hit like blunt force. Henry took a slow breath, trying to steady the rise of defensiveness clawing up his chest. Tim, I raised this family. I did everything I could to keep us together, to give you and your sister a sense of home. And now it feels like none of that matters. Tim's expression softened, but only slightly. It does matter, Dad. It always has. But that doesn't mean you haven't made mistakes. The quiet truth of that sentence cut deeper than any accusation Olivia had thrown at him. Henry felt something twist inside him, not just hurt, but betrayal. Why can't you see things from my side? He asked quietly. Why can't you consider that maybe I'm the one feeling pushed out? I've tried to hold this family together, and somehow everyone acts like I'm the problem. Tim closed his eyes briefly. Because, Dad, sometimes you are the problem. His voice cracked. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but your need to control the narrative, the traditions, the house, the decisions, it pushes people away. It's pushed Olivia away. It's pushed Jacob away. And honestly, it's pushed me away too. The room fell into a heavy stillness. Henry stared at his son, the boy he had carried on his shoulders, taught to ride a bike, brought to ball games. And now, that boy looked like a man trying not to resent him. The realization settled like weight on Henry's chest. He tried to speak, but the words tangled. I thought, his voice faltered, I thought I was doing the right thing. I know you did, Tim said gently, but intention doesn't erase impact. A long silence passed between them, filled with years of unspoken feelings and unresolved tensions. Henry finally sank into a chair, the exhaustion catching up with him. So tell me, he murmured, unable to hide the defeat in his voice. What do you want me to do, Tim? Change who I am? Just stop caring about family traditions. Let go of everything that's held us together. Tim sat down across from him, his expression softening but still lined with frustration. No, I don't want you to stop caring. I just want you to care in a way that doesn't suffocate everyone else. I want you to make room for other people's ideas, other people's needs. Henry looked down at his hands. They felt old, heavy. I don't know if I know how to do that. For the first time, Tim didn't try to reassure him. He didn't offer a solution or a comforting word. Instead, he let the truth hang in the air. Maybe that's something we'll have to figure out, he said quietly. Separately or together, I don't know yet. The uncertainty in Tim's voice struck Henry harder than anger ever could. The conversation faded, not because anything had been resolved, but because neither man knew what else to say. They were both standing at the edge of something, a fault line years in the making. Tim eventually stood and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Henry alone with the echo of his words. Henry rose slowly and retreated to his study, the one place in the house still untouched by conflict. But even there, surrounded by memories and pieces of his past, he felt more unsure of his place in the family than ever. And for the first time, he wondered if he was losing them for good. Night settled over the house with a stillness Henry hadn't felt in years, heavy, contemplative, almost suffocating. He sat alone in the dim glow of the living room lamp, the untouched book on his lap serving as nothing more than a placeholder for his hands. Every few minutes, he exhaled deeply, as if trying to push out the knot of guilt tightening inside him. His mind kept looping through the events of Thanksgiving, piece by painful piece. Olivia's expression twisted with rage. the plate shattering against the table, Tim's frustration boiling over into words he never expected to hear from his own son, Caroline's tired eyes. Even the silence in the house afterward felt like an indictment. He replayed it all, searching for the exact moment things had gone wrong, but every memory only pulled him deeper into the realization that this hadn't been one moment, it had been years of them. Years of small dismissals, rigid expectations, unspoken resentments. Years of him thinking he was preserving something precious, when in reality he might have been holding on so tightly that everyone else felt strangled by it. The sound of soft footsteps pulled him from his thoughts. Maggie entered the room wearing her thick, worn robe, the very one she'd worn every winter for decades. She paused when she saw him, reading the heaviness in his posture, the slump of his shoulders. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked gently. Henry shook his head. "Too much on my mind." Maggie sat beside him, tucking one leg under herself. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply existed in the quiet, the tension of the last few days lingering between them like a chill. Finally, Maggie sighed. "I've been thinking a lot too, about everything that's happened." Henry swallowed hard. "I know I haven't made it easy." "That's not what I meant," she said softly. "But Henry, I'm hurting too. Watching our family break apart like that, watching Olivia storm out, listening to Tim trying to pick between us." Her voice quivered. "It tore me apart." He turned to her, guilt tightening in his chest. "I never wanted this. I never wanted any of them to feel torn." "I know," she whispered. "But I also know Liv wasn't entirely wrong, and neither was Tim." Henry flinched at the honesty, but he didn't turn away. Maggie's voice wasn't sharp or accusing. It was careful, loving, but truthful in a way he needed to hear. "I love you," she continued, placing her hand over his. "And I've supported you through every tradition, every holiday, every decision you made for this family. But Henry, I've also watched how much control you hold on to, how hard it is for you to let things change." He looked down at their intertwined hands, the weight of her words sinking deeper than any he'd heard yet. Maggie exhaled slowly. "When the kids were little, they followed your lead because they admired you. But they're grown now. They have partners, their own homes, their own ways of doing things. And when you insist they stick to your ways, it feels like there's no room for them to grow." Henry closed his eyes. The truth stung, but not because she was wrong, because he knew she was right. He had always been the anchor of the family, the one who held tradition steady, who kept the holiday rituals alive. But he never stopped to ask if anyone still wanted the same things. He opened his eyes again, voice quiet. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting them, hurting her. I thought I was holding the family together, but maybe I was holding them back." Maggie softened, brushing her thumb over the back of his hand. "You weren't trying to hurt anyone, but maybe now it's me to step back, to let them make their own decisions, their own traditions, and trust that it won't make you any less important to them." The thought of releasing control, of letting the next generation decide the direction of the family, terrified him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Without that role, who was he? A question he'd never needed to ask until now. "I don't know if I can do that," he admitted. "Maybe you don't have to do it all at once," she said. "Maybe just start by listening. Let them speak. Let them lead when they want to. You don't have to disappear, Henry. You just need to make room." He leaned back into the couch, her words rolling through him like a slow tide. The tension in his chest eased, not gone, but loosened, as if she'd cracked open a door he hadn't realized was locked. They sat together in silence until fatigue finally weighed down his eyes. When Maggie coaxed him to bed, he felt something unexpected, a strange mix of conflict and calm. Conflicted because the future felt uncertain. Calmer because, for the first time, he saw a path forward. That night, as he drifted into sleep, Henry understood something important. Maybe stepping back wasn't losing control. Maybe it was giving his family back the freedom to love him in their own way. And that thought, fragile as it was, carried him into the next day with the faintest sense of peace. 3 days had passed since Henry's late-night conversation with Maggie, and though the house felt calmer, the quiet carried a different weight now, one built from waiting, wondering, hoping something might shift. Henry spent most of his time in the yard or in his study, trying not to dwell on what he couldn't control. But the silence between him and Olivia lingered like a bruise he couldn't stop pressing on, tender and unresolved. On the fourth morning, as he sat at the kitchen table nursing a cup of tea, his phone buzzed. He assumed it was Tim or Caroline checking in, but when he glanced at the screen, his breath caught. Olivia. For a moment he just stared at her name, his pulse quickening. He wasn't ready, not entirely. But he also knew that avoiding the message would only stretch the ache longer. So he opened it. "Henry, if you're free today, I'd like to talk. I owe you an apology." He read the text twice, unsure he'd interpreted it correctly. Olivia, apologizing. After everything, the accusations, the plate, the humiliation, he never expected her to be the one reaching out first. His hands trembled slightly as he typed back. "I'm here, come by whenever you're comfortable." Less than an hour later, Olivia arrived. She didn't storm in like she had on Thanksgiving. She didn't carry the sharp, defensive posture she wore like armor. Instead, she walked slowly, cautiously, as if entering sacred ground she wasn't sure she had the right to step on anymore. Henry opened the door, and for a moment they simply looked at each other. Her eyes were softer than he'd seen in years, tired, red around the edges, but honest. "Hi," she whispered. "Hi," he replied. They moved to the living room, sitting across from one another like two people who were not family, but strangers trying to understand where everything had gone wrong. Olivia twisted her wedding ring slowly, gathering the courage to speak. Finally she drew in a breath. "Henry, I'm sorry for Thanksgiving, for yelling, for throwing that plate. I shouldn't have done that." Her voice cracked and she blinked hard. "I was wrong." Henry felt his chest loosen, but he stayed quiet, allowing her the space she clearly needed. "I've been angry for so long," she continued, her gaze fixed on her hands. "Years, honestly, and it wasn't all about you, but you became the person I blamed, for feeling left out, for feeling like I didn't belong. I've been carrying that resentment since Jacob and I got married." She took a shaking breath. "And I took it out on you, unfairly." Henry leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. "Olivia, I didn't know you felt that way." "I know," she said, finally meeting his eyes. "And that's part of the problem. I never told you. I just waited for you to include me, to welcome me in the way I hoped for. And when it didn't happen, I convinced myself you didn't want me in the family. I assumed the worst." Her voice softened to almost a whisper. "And on Thanksgiving, everything just exploded." Henry felt the sting of her words, but he also heard something else underneath: fear, pain, a vulnerability she had never shown him before. He nodded slowly. "It hurt, Olivia," he admitted, his voice warm but steady. "What you said, what you did, it hurt deeply, but hearing this now means something to me, more than you know." She brushed a tear from her cheek quickly, embarrassed by the emotion. "I just don't know if things can really go back to normal between us," she confessed. "I want to make things right, but I'm scared the damage is permanent." Henry let her words settle before responding. "Maybe we done. To go back," he said quietly. "Maybe we start over, not forget what happened, but learn from it. Take it one step at a time." Olivia looked at him, searching his face for anger or blame, but finding neither. Only a tired man who loved his family enough to try again. She nodded slowly. "Okay, maybe we can try." They talked a bit more, not deeply, not perfectly, but honestly. Enough for the frost to melt, enough for something new to begin forming in the cracks. As she stood to leave, she hesitated near the doorway. "Thank you for hearing me," she said softly. "I know I don't deserve your patience right now, but I appreciate it." Henry offered her a small, tentative smile. "We both deserve another chance." She gave him one more look, one that held apology, uncertainty, and the faintest spark of hope before stepping outside. When the door closed, Henry leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. The hurt wasn't gone, not by a long shot, but for the first time since Thanksgiving, something warm flickered in his chest. Not forgiveness, not resolution, but the possibility of healing. And that, he realized, was enough to start rebuilding what had been broken. Henry waited for Tim on the back porch, sitting in the old wooden chair that had supported him through decades of family milestones, birthdays, summer cookouts, late-night talks with his children when they were young. Today, though, the chair felt different. It felt like a witness to everything he'd done wrong, everything he still hoped he might fix. When Tim stepped outside, he looked hesitant, as though unsure whether this conversation would heal anything or tear something else open. Henry motioned for him to sit, offering a tired but earnest smile. "Tim," he began softly, "we need to talk, really talk, not as father and son, just two people trying to understand each other." Tim nodded, settling into the chair across from him. "Yeah, I know." For a few seconds they sat in silence, the distant hum of passing cars drifting through the quiet neighborhood. Tim finally spoke first, his voice low and heavy. "Dad, I've been holding a lot in for a long time," he admitted. "Stuff I probably should have said years ago." Henry felt the muscles in his shoulders tense, but he didn't interrupt. This time he was determined to listen, truly listen. Tim exhaled slowly. "Growing up, I always looked up to you. You were the one who kept the family together, the one who made sure we had traditions and routines. It felt safe. But when I got older, I realized it also felt stifling." Henry's chest tightened. He'd expected pain in this conversation, but hearing it so plainly still hurt. Tim continued, his expression pained but honest. "You always had the final say, on everything, and I guess I got used to stepping back, not making waves, letting you lead even when I wanted something different. But Olivia, she's not built that way. She wants a voice. She wants to feel equal." Henry ran a hand over his face, a wave of guilt flowing through him. "I never meant to shut you out," he whispered. "I know," Tim said gently, "but intentions don't erase how things felt." He paused, looking down at his hands. "Olivia's not perfect. She handled things badly, really badly, but a lot of the resentment she carries, it's tied to the same things I've felt for years." Henry absorbed every word, feeling the weight of each piece of truth settle in. He had spent so long believing that preserving tradition was the same as protecting his family. He never stopped to consider how suffocating it might feel for those who wanted a chance to lead, to shape things in their own way. "I was so focused on holding everything together," Henry admitted quietly, "that I didn't notice how tightly I was gripping it. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I let go, the family would fall apart." Tim shook his head. "Dad, families don't fall apart because traditions change. They fall apart when people stop feeling heard, when they feel like there's no room for them." Henry looked up, meeting his son's eyes. "So how do we fix it? How do we move forward?" Tim hesitated, then leaned forward, his voice steadier. "I think we need balance. Keep the traditions that matter, but let us add to them. Let us host sometimes. Let Olivia contribute without feeling judged. Let the younger generation make decisions too." Henry let the suggestion settle in his mind. It was simple, logical, and yet deeply unfamiliar. But for the first time, it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like an invitation. "You're right," Henry said after a long pause. "Being the patriarch doesn't mean I need to control everything. Maybe it's time I start leading with less authority and more love." Tim's expression softened with relief. "That's all I've ever wanted, Dad, for us to find a middle ground." A small smile tugged at Henry's lips. "Then we'll take it one step at a time." Tim nodded, and for a moment they simply sat together, the 10. Sion finally loosening between them. Years of unspoken frustration began to fade, replaced by something quieter, steadier: hope. I don't expect things to be perfect overnight, Tim said, rising from his chair. But I want to try. I want us to rebuild even if it takes time. Henry stood too, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. We'll rebuild, he promised. Together. As Tim headed back inside, Henry inhaled a deep breath of cool evening air. The knot in his chest had loosened, replaced by a cautious optimism he hadn't felt in weeks. For the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, his family had a chance to start fresh. If he was willing to keep walking this new path. Henry arrived at the small cafe on Main Street 10 minutes early, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea he wasn't drinking. He stared out the window, watching cars drift by and families move in and out of nearby shops. Everyone seemed to be going about their lives without the weight he carried in his chest. He wondered if Olivia felt that same heaviness, the same ache of unresolved tension that had lingered since Thanksgiving. When the cafe door finally opened and Olivia stepped inside, Henry straightened in his seat. She looked cautious, scanning the room before her eyes landed on him. She offered a tight, polite nod, no warmth yet but no hostility either. A step forward. "Hi," she said quietly as she approached their table. "Hi," Henry replied, trying to keep his voice calm, steady. She sat across from him, removing her coat slowly, as if unsure whether she should fully settle in. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of espresso machines and soft chatter from other customers filled the silence between them. "I appreciate you meeting with me," Henry finally said. "I know this isn't easy." Olivia looked down at her hands. "It needed to happen," she admitted. "I didn't want our last real conversation to be what it was." Henry nodded, grateful for her honesty. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, "about everything. Tim helped me see things I didn't want to see, and I want to tell you that I may have tried to control more than I realized. I thought I was protecting tradition, but maybe I was overstepping." Olivia's eyes flicked up to his, surprised but not dismissive. She took a slow breath before speaking. "I know you care about this family. I've never doubted that." She paused, gathering herself. "But when I married Jacob, I thought I was becoming part of something. Instead, I felt like I was constantly being tested." Henry's brow furrowed. "Tested how?" She looked away, her voice softening. "I never felt like anything I did was right. If I offered to bring a dish, it was already planned. If I suggested hosting something, it was dismissed. If I tried to share an idea, it was compared to how you and Maggie always did it." Her throat tightened. "It felt like I was competing with decades of traditions I could never live up to." Henry felt those words land heavily, not because they were unfair, but because they were painfully true. "I didn't see it that way," he said, "but hearing it now, I get it. I can see how that would make you feel shut out." Olivia nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "It wasn't intentional on your part, I know that, but unintentional hurt is still hurt, and I carried it for so long that it just came out all at once." "The plate," Henry murmured, attempting a small, wry smile. She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm still mortified about that," she whispered. "It wasn't who I want to be. I let everything boil over and I took it out on you." Henry shook his head lightly. "It was a bad moment, but bad moments don't have to define people." Olivia's shoulders eased, and for the first time since she'd walked in, she looked at him. Not as an adversary, not as a man she resented, but as someone she could possibly rebuild with. They continued talking, slowly peeling back years of misunderstandings. Henry admitted that he'd clung to his role as head of the family so tightly that he'd lost sight of how it affected others. Olivia acknowledged her own insecurities, how stepping into a family with long-established traditions felt like walking onto a stage where everyone else already knew the script. At times, the conversation was heavy, emotional, even awkward, but each moment felt like another brick being lifted from the wall between them. Near the end of their conversation, Olivia sighed. "I don't know how quickly I can move past everything. I'm still healing from it. and I know you probably are too." Henry nodded, accepting the truth of that. "I'm not expecting immediate forgiveness, or for us to be perfectly fine overnight. I just want us to keep trying, step by step." She studied him for a moment, then gave a small, genuine smile, faint but real. "I think we can do that." They stood to leave, both fumbling slightly as they reached for their coats. As Olivia headed toward the door, she paused and glanced back. "Thank you for listening today," she said, "really listening." Henry felt a warmth he hadn't felt in weeks. "Thank you for talking, Olivia." As she walked out into the crisp air, Henry watched her go, feeling something shift inside him. The wound between them wasn't healed, not yet, but for the first time he could feel the edges beginning to mend. And that small spark, fragile but alive, filled him with the hopeful sense that maybe their family still had a chance, as long as they kept moving forward. In the weeks that followed his coffee meeting with Olivia, Henry felt something surprising take shape: calm. Not complete, not effortless, but new. A softer rhythm settled into his days. Small gestures replaced the old stiffness between him and Olivia. A kind text from her checking in, a shared recipe, a short call about Jacob's schedule. Nothing grand, nothing dramatic, but enough to signal that the ice was melting. For the first time in a long while, Henry didn't feel like he was tiptoeing around unresolved resentment. Instead, he felt like he and Olivia were slowly building something fragile but real. One afternoon, while Henry was trimming the hedges outside, his phone buzzed. Caroline's name lit up the screen. He answered and immediately heard the relief in her voice. "Dad," she said, sounding almost cheerful, "I just talked to Olivia earlier. She told me you two met for coffee. She said it went surprisingly well." Henry chuckled softly. "It did. We cleared the air a little, still a long way to go, but it was a start." "I'm proud of you," Caroline said. "Honestly, this whole thing has been rough, but you're trying, and that matters more than you realize." Henry felt a warmth in his chest, subtle but steady. "Thank you, sweetheart." Caroline paused before adding gently, "Just remember, the work isn't over yet. Rebuilding isn't quick, but it is possible." Her words lingered long after the call ended, echoing as Henry returned to his yard work. She was right. Healing wasn't a single conversation or even a handful of them. It was slow, deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable, and it required him to keep evolving, something he hadn't expected to do at this stage in life. That evening, Henry sat alone in his study, staring at old photos of the kids when they were young. Tim in a baseball uniform, dirt on his cheeks and pride in his eyes. Caroline with missing teeth and braided hair. Jacob blowing out candles on his 8th birthday cake. The memories felt bittersweet now, beautiful but also tinged with the knowledge that somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing his children as adults with their own lives and needs. He closed the photo album and leaned back, exhaling heavily. "I didn't realize how much I held on," he murmured to himself. "Held on so tight I didn't leave room for anyone else." A knock on the doorframe pulled him out of his thoughts. Tim stepped inside, a soft smile on his face. "Hey, Dad, you got a minute?" Henry nodded, motioning for him to sit. Tim took the chair beside him, looking more relaxed than he had in months. "I talked to Liv," Tim began. "She told me about your coffee. She said she felt heard, finally." Henry's heart tightened. "I'm glad she felt that." Tim looked down at his hands, then back up. "Dad, I want to say thank you for trying. I know changing old habits isn't easy, and I know I probably hit you pretty hard with some of the things I said before." Henry gave a small, understanding smile. "You said what I needed to hear." For a moment, the two men sat in comfortable silence, something that had once been rare. Tim's voice softened. "We're family, and family isn't about one person leading the way. It's about all of us staying connected, even when it's messy. I guess I forgot that too." Henry nodded, absorbing the words with a quiet tenderness. "My legacy, It won't be the traditions I forced everyone to follow, he said thoughtfully. It needs to be the love I show, the patience, the understanding. That's what I want you all to remember. Tim's eyes softened. We already do, Dad. They exchanged a look, father and son, both bruised by conflict but finally beginning to heal. As Thanksgiving crept closer again, just a year since the disaster that shattered everything, Henry found himself feeling something unexpected: clarity. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't clinging to expectations. He wasn't planning every detail or worrying about how things should be. Instead, he felt open, ready, prepared to let this Thanksgiving be whatever it needed to be: imperfect, shared, genuine. One crisp evening, he stood by the living room window and looked out at the fading autumn light. For the first time in years, his heart felt lighter, not because everything was perfect now, but because the weight he'd carried, resentment, stubbornness, old wounds, had finally begun to lift. And as that weight eased, something else settled in its place. Peace, slow and soft, and the steady hope that maybe, just maybe, his family was finding its way back to one another. Henry spent the better part of the morning pacing the kitchen floor, rehearsing the invitation he planned to send. Even after all the progress he and Olivia had made, inviting her and Jacob back into his home for a full family gathering felt like stepping onto thin ice. But something inside him, something steadier than fear, pushed him forward. Peace wasn't built on silence, it was built on trying. After several drafts, he finally typed a simple message. We're having a small dinner Friday night. I'd love for you and Jacob to join us. No pressure, just family. He read it 3 times before hitting send. To his surprise, Olivia replied not with hesitation, but with a soft, cautious, "We'll be there, thank you for inviting us." Tim and Caroline were quick to support the idea. Caroline hugged him from behind while he stood at the sink. "This is the right move, Dad. It means a lot that you're taking the lead in a new way." Tim echoed her sentiment later that evening, saying, "It's not about going back to normal, it's about starting fresh. And you're doing that." Still, when Friday night arrived, Henry felt a nervous flutter he hadn't felt since his kids were young. The table was set simply, nothing overly traditional, nothing imposing. Maggie helped chop vegetables, humming softly, sensing Henry's tension but letting him find his footing. The house smelled warm and inviting, but not the kind of overwhelming Thanksgiving performance he'd unconsciously staged in years past. When the doorbell rang, Henry wiped his hands on a towel and forced himself to breathe before opening the door. Olivia and Jacob stood there, a mix of nerves and soft smiles on their faces. Olivia clutched a small dessert dish in her hands, a gesture that said more than words. Jacob gave his father a tentative but warm embrace, the kind that said he wanted this night to work too. Inside, the evening began awkwardly. Conversations started and stopped. People reached for topics the way one reaches for a misplaced set of keys, fumbling, unsure. Olivia sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, Jacob rubbing his thumb over the back of her hand for reassurance. But awkwardness, Henry reminded himself, wasn't failure. It was simply the cost of rebuilding. Dinner started slowly, but like most good things, it grew in warmth over time. Caroline shared a story about her latest chaotic day at work, which made Tim laugh harder than expected. Maggie chimed in with a gentle tease about Henry's attempt at baking rolls. We're lucky they didn't break anyone's teeth. Even Olivia smiled at that. The first real breakthrough came halfway through the meal, when Olivia shifted in her seat and cleared her throat. I wanted to say something," she said, her voice steady but unsure. The table fell quiet. "I know things have been tense," she continued, "mostly because of me, and I'm still learning how to let go of the resentment I carried." Her eyes flicked toward Henry. "But when we talked the other day, I realized how much I misunderstood, and how much I wasn't communicating. I'm trying to change that." Henry nodded, giving her his full attention. "I'm trying too," he said gently, "more than you know." Olivia smiled lightly, relief softening the tension in her shoulders. From there, the evening opened up. Stories began to flow, laughter threaded through the room, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a battleground, it felt like home. Jacob eventually spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I didn't handle everything well either," he admitted. "I should have stepped in sooner, supported Liv better, supported you, Dad, I'm sorry." Henry reached across the table and squeezed his son's hand. "We're all learning," he said simply. The rest of the evening unfolded with surprising ease. They shared old memories, Henry's insistence on keeping the same angel on top of the Christmas tree for 40 years, Tim's infamous high school haircut, Caroline's failed attempt at making homemade jam that exploded in the kitchen. Even Olivia contributed stories, offering glimpses into her childhood, her quirks, her fears. And Henry listened, really listened, in a way he never had before. By the end of the night, the dishes were cleared, the candles melted halfway down, and a comfortable silence settled over the family. They didn't hug or make grand promises. They didn't declare everything fixed. But they sat together, close, united even if fragile. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as Henry stood at the sink later, rinsing a plate under warm water, he felt something he hadn't felt in far too long, a quiet confidence that the worst was behind them. Their journey wasn't over, healing wasn't complete, but they were walking towards something better. And for the first time, they were walking there together. In the weeks that followed the family dinner, Henry found himself reflecting more than he had in years. He would catch himself lingering in doorways, hands resting on old furniture as memories surfaced, some good, some painful, all instructive. The tension that once clouded his home had begun to lift, replaced by a cautious, fragile warmth. And each day, as he replayed the past months in his mind, he saw more clearly how far they had all come since Thanksgiving. Not just Olivia, not just Tim, but himself. One crisp Saturday morning, Henry stood in his driveway debating whether to follow through on a thought that had nudged him for days. Olivia had mentioned during their last family gathering that she and Jacob were planning to renovate their guest room, something about old wallpaper and a closet that never closed properly. It wasn't a plea for help, but Henry heard an opening, a chance to bridge the gap not with words but with presence. After a deep breath, he got in his car and drove to their home. When Jacob opened the door, his surprise was obvious but not unwelcome. Olivia soon appeared behind him, wiping her hands on a paint-speckled towel. Her expression softened the moment she saw Henry, not bright, not overly enthusiastic, but genuinely receptive. "Henry," she said with a small smile, "we weren't expecting you." "I know," he replied. "I just thought maybe I could help with the renovation, if you'd like." Olivia exchanged a glance with Jacob, one of those silent conversations married couples learn to have, and then nodded. "We'd appreciate that." Inside, the guest room was already half torn apart. Wallpaper peeled in strips from the wall, paint cans lined the floor, and tools sat scattered in small piles. Henry rolled up his sleeves and got to work, deliberately letting Olivia take the lead. She pointed out what she wanted removed, what she wanted sanded, what she wanted painted. And Henry listened, not with quiet resistance, not with subtle disapproval, but with full, open attention. As they worked side by side, something eased between them. The silence wasn't heavy or cautious, it was companionable. Now and then, Olivia explained why she chose a certain color or layout, and Henry found himself asking questions, not to challenge her but to understand her preferences. It felt strange to him, this conscious release of control, but also freeing. At one point, Olivia paused while tearing down a stubborn strip of wallpaper. "You know," she said softly, "I used to feel nervous suggesting anything in front of you. I always worried you'd think my ideas were ridiculous." Henry set down his paintbrush, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm sorry you ever felt that way. I wasn't listening the way I should have been. I see that now." Her shoulders relaxed. She nodded slowly. I can tell you're trying, and it means more than you think. Jacob entered the room then, carrying a toolbox. He watched them for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Henry didn't miss the relief etched subtly across his son's face, a weight that had clearly rested on him for too long. The way Jacob moved closer, offering tools, joining the conversation, it was clear he saw something shifting too. Throughout the day, Henry continued to step back when needed, letting Olivia and Jacob make decisions without offering unsolicited advice. When he did speak up, he framed his suggestions as questions, giving them space to accept or decline. And each time they did either, Henry felt something warm settle inside him, a realization that letting go didn't mean fading away. It meant making room for connection. By late afternoon, the guest room looked entirely transformed. Fresh paint shimmered lightly on the walls, the old wallpaper was gone, and the closet finally closed flush with the frame. Olivia stood back, admiring their progress. "It looks really good," she said, almost surprised. Henry chuckled. "You had a good vision for it." She turned toward him, her expression shifting from satisfaction to something deeper, gratitude. "Thank you, Henry, for today. For everything you've been trying to change, I see it, and I appreciate it." Her words softened something inside him, something he didn't realize had still been guarded. He nodded, feeling emotion swell quietly in his chest. As he prepared to leave, Jacob walked him to the door. "Dad," he said, standing a little straighter than before, "I'm glad you came. Really." Henry gave his son a gentle pat on the shoulder. "I'm glad I did too." Driving home, Henry felt a strange mixture of tiredness and relief wash over him. He stared at the road ahead, thinking about how far he'd come, how far all of them had come, from that painful Thanksgiving day. He wasn't losing his role in the family. He was finally earning a new one. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful about where they were heading next. The holiday season crept in gently that year. Winter lights along the neighborhood fences, wreaths on doors, the faint smell of pine drifting through grocery store aisles. For Henry, the season had always been familiar, predictable, steeped in the rituals he had clung to for most of his life. But this year, everything felt different, softer, quieter, more intentional. One evening, he found himself sitting alone in the living room, the glow of a small lamp casting warm light across the family photos on the wall. Pictures of birthdays, beach trips, Christmas mornings, and countless Thanksgivings stared back at him. For the first time, Henry didn't see himself as the center holding everyone together. Instead, he saw the web of relationships, the weaving of personalities, and the places where he had held too tightly, and the places he was now learning to let go. He leaned back in his chair, his heart swelling with a mixture of gratitude and humility. "Family," he murmured to himself, "isn't about perfection. It's about staying even when it's hard." A knock on the doorframe pulled him from his thoughts. Tim stepped into the room holding two steaming mugs of cocoa. He handed one to Henry and took the seat beside him. "You okay, Dad?" Tim asked gently. Henry nodded, "Just thinking about everything, how far we've come." Tim gave a small smile. "I've been thinking about that too." They sat for a moment, the silence warm, not strained. Eventually, Tim spoke again, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want to tell you something. I never said it before, not clearly enough. But I'm grateful for you, for the changes you've made. I know it hasn't been easy." Henry swallowed, the emotion rising fast. "I didn't realize how much I needed to change," he admitted quietly. "I thought I was doing everything for this family, but I wasn't seeing what it was costing everyone else." Tim nodded. "And now you are." He placed a hand on Henry's arm. "I'm proud of you." The words hit Henry's chest with a warmth that spread slowly, steadily. He hadn't realized how badly he needed to hear something like that, not from validation, but from connection. "For the first time in a long while," Henry said, "I'm proud of myself too." As preparations for their next holiday gathering approached, Henry felt an unfamiliar kind of anticipation, not the anxious need to orchestrate everything, but a gentle hopefulness. He didn't hover over Maggie's shoulder while she chopped vegetables. He didn't dictate which dishes were necessary. He simply helped when asked, stepped aside when appropriate, and let the house fill naturally with its own energy. When Olivia and Jacob arrived that evening, Henry noticed the subtle shift immediately. Olivia's shoulders weren't tight. Her smile wasn't forced. Jacob's eyes didn't flicker with worry over potential tension. Instead, they walked in together, still cautious, still aware of their history but carrying an unmistakable warmth with them. Olivia greeted Henry with a genuine smile and a soft, "It smells great in here." Henry smiled back. "Maggie's doing most of the work. I'm just the assistant today." Olivia laughed lightly, an easy, comfortable sound, and something inside Henry loosened even more. As the evening unfolded, the conversations flowed naturally. Laughter came without strain. There were moments of quiet connection, moments where old wounds were felt but didn't reopen, moments where the new foundation they were building felt steady. When the meal was done and the family gathered in the living room, Tim raised his glass. "I just want to say," he began, glancing at each face in the room, "that this year means more than I can explain. We've all been through a lot, and somehow we're stronger for it." Olivia nodded, her eyes glistening. "I think we're entering a new chapter," she added softly, "one where we actually hear each other." Jacob squeezed her hand, "And where we grow together, all of us." Henry lifted his glass slowly, his voice thick but warm. "I'm grateful for second chances, for forgiveness, and for the love that kept us tied together even when we didn't know how to show it." They clinked glasses, softly, meaningfully, and for a moment the world felt perfectly still. As the night wound down, Henry sat back and looked around at the faces he cherished. His family, imperfect, complicated, resilient. They weren't the same family they once were, but maybe they were better now. For the first time in many years, Henry felt something deep and unmistakable settle into his chest: peace. A peace born not from holding on, but from finally learning when to let go. And as he watched his family laugh, talk, and move forward together, Henry knew one thing for certain. He had finally discovered the true meaning of family. Not tradition alone, but love shaped through growth, forgiveness, and an open heart. The house glowed softly with holiday lights, their reflections dancing across the windows like quiet reminders of how far the family had come. Henry stood near the doorway of the living room, hands tucked into the pockets of his sweater, watching his family gather in a way that felt different, not forced, not tense, but naturally, gently connected. There were still careful pauses, still lingering hesitations, yet the air carried warmth instead of conflict, intention instead of pressure. Olivia laughed at something Jacob whispered to her near the fireplace. It wasn't a loud laugh, not the carefree sound of someone completely healed, but it was real, genuine, and that alone filled Henry with a sense of pride he hadn't felt in years. She didn't avoid him, she didn't shrink back. Every so often her eyes drifted toward him, offering a small smile, cautious but present, open. He took in the scene slowly. Caroline passing mugs of cocoa to everyone. Tim assembling a toy for one of the kids on the floor, grumbling as small pieces kept slipping from his fingers. Maggie adjusting the ribbon on a wreath she had hung earlier, humming softly. Olivia leaning her head gently against Jacob's shoulder. For the first time in a long while, this didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a family rediscovering itself. Henry exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He no longer felt that desperate need to orchestrate every detail, to dictate the schedule, the menu, the traditions. Instead, he let the holiday unfold around him. Let others take the lead. Let the younger generation shape the gathering in ways that reflected who they were, not who he expected them to be. And the surprising thing, the world didn't fall apart. The family didn't drift. If anything, they drew closer. Tim eventually stood and made his way over to Henry, stretching his back with a groan. "You doing all right over here?" he asked, nudging Henry's shoulder lightly. Henry smiled. "I'm good, son, just taking it all in." Tim followed his gaze toward the living room. "It feels different this year," he said softly, "in a good way." Henry nodded. "It does, and I'm proud of us, all of us." Tim turned, really looking at him. "Dad, I wanted to say something. I know I've said pieces of it before, but—" He paused, emotion tightening his throat. "I'm proud of you. You've made real changes, hard ones, and it's made our family stronger." Henry swallowed back the warmth rising in his chest. Tim wasn't a man who gave praise easily, and hearing it now meant more than he could express. He placed a steady hand on Tim's back. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That means a lot." A few minutes later, Caroline approached, her expression soft and thoughtful. "Dad," she said, slipping her arm through his, "I just wanted to say I'm glad you're here, really here. Not just the head of the table, not the one running everything, just Dad." He chuckled. "That sounds about right." "I mean it," she insisted, squeezing his arm. "We've all come so far since Thanksgiving. And yes, there's still work to be done. But the fact that we're even at this point, it's because you decided to listen, to change, to let us grow. That means everything." Henry looked at her, taking in the sincerity written across her face. "I'm learning," he admitted. "Slowly maybe, but I'm learning." She smiled. "That's all any of us can do." As the night unfolded, Henry continued to watch the room, not with the anxious eyes of a man trying to maintain order, but with the peace of someone who finally understood his true place in the family. He wasn't the authority anymore. He wasn't the enforcer of tradition. He was the foundation, steady, supportive, willing to bend so others could flourish. Family, he realized, wasn't about clinging to old ways or molding everyone into the same pattern. It was about listening, compromising, letting go of control so love had room to breathe. Later, as everyone gathered for a group photo, Olivia stepped beside him and offered a soft but sincere, "Thank you for today, Henry." He nodded. "Thank you for being here." As the camera clicked, capturing a moment that felt both tender and triumphant, Henry felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle over him. This was a new chapter. Not perfect, not polished, but built with care, effort, and understanding. And for the first time in a long time, he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. Not leading the family, but standing with them. The late afternoon sun cast long, golden streaks across the neighborhood as Henry and Tim stepped outside for a quiet walk. The air was cool, crisp, the kind that carried the faint scent of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Leaves crunched beneath their shoes as they moved slowly down the street, side by side, their pace unhurried. For once, nothing pressed on them. No lingering tension, no unspoken conflict, just a shared silence that felt natural instead of strained. Henry breathed in deeply, letting the calm settle through him. "It's strange," he said after a moment, his voice low. "I feel lighter these days, like I'm finally letting go of something I didn't realize I was carrying." Tim glanced at him, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. "You seem lighter," he said softly. "It's good to see." They continued walking, the rhythm of their steps steady. Henry hesitated before speaking again. "You know, Tim, I've been thinking a lot about the past, about the kind of father I was and the kind of father-in-law I became." His words wavered with vulnerability. "I wasn't always who I wanted to be. I see that now. I thought I was doing the right things, but I missed a lot. I pushed too hard, held too tight. I regret that." Tim stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "Dad," he said gently, "every parent makes mistakes. Every family hits rough patches. What matters is whether you're willing to grow past them. And you have. You're trying, really trying. That means more than you know." Henry's gaze dropped to the sidewalk, the weight of his own admission lingering. "I just wish I'd seen it earlier, before things got so broken." Tim shook his head. "Sometimes it takes a storm to figure out what needs fixing. What matters is you're doing the work now." They resumed walking, the silence between them warmer than before. A few houses down, a dog barked behind a fence. A couple raked leaves together in their yard. Life felt simple, steady, and Henry felt himself matching that pace, no longer clinging to the past, just moving forward one step at a time. After a minute, Henry spoke again. "I've been thinking a lot about Jacob and Olivia too, about how things will go from here." He inhaled slowly. "I'm hopeful, I really am, but I know it's going to take time to rebuild trust, to prove I'm changing, not just saying it." Tim nodded. "They see the effort, Dad. Olivia told me she feels the difference already. Jacob does too. It won't be perfect, but nothing ever is. What matters is that you're building something new with them." Henry smiled faintly, comforted by the reassurance. The walk felt symbolic, slow, intentional, reflective. Each step marked the distance they'd traveled as a family and the distance still ahead. Healing wasn't linear, he knew, but walking side by side with his son made the path feel less daunting. As they circled back toward the house, the sky shifted from gold to soft lavender. Warm lights glowed from the windows, silhouettes moving inside, Maggie setting the table, Olivia chatting quietly with Caroline, Jacob helping a child reach something on a shelf. It looked peaceful. It looked like home. Henry paused at the end of the driveway, taking it all in. "You know," he said quietly, "for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I'm doing right by them. All of them." Tim rested a hand on his shoulder. "You are Dad, and you'll keep doing it. We all will." They walked up the steps together, entering the house where the soft murmur of family conversation met them. The living room glowed with warmth, laughter blending with the quiet hum of holiday music. No tension, no defensiveness, just presence. Henry slipped out of his jacket and joined the group, settling into the couch beside Maggie. Olivia offered him a gentle smile from across the room. Jacob handed him a mug of tea. Caroline asked him about a memory from when she was a kid. The evening flowed easily, a quiet harmony threading through the hours. There were still unhealed corners, still histories to work through, but the foundation was steady now, strengthened by honesty, effort, and forgiveness. As Henry looked around at the people he loved most, a sense of peace spread through him, calm, deep, and rooted. They were beginning a new chapter, one built not on control or tradition alone, but on understanding, choice, and connection. And for the first time, he believed it would hold. Spring settled into the Clark family's lives with a gentleness Henry never could have imagined months earlier. The air felt lighter, the house quieter, not with tension, but with something calmer, something easier. Henry found himself waking up each morning without that tightness in his chest, without the anxious impulse to check, confirm, plan, or oversee. Somewhere along the way, he had finally begun to loosen his grip. And surprisingly, nothing fell apart. Instead, his family began moving in ways he had never allowed them to before, confident, independent, shaping traditions with their own hands. And Henry, for the first time, simply watched, participated, listened. A few weeks into this new rhythm, Olivia called with an invitation that caught him off guard. "Henry," she said, her voice steady but warm, "Jacob and I were hoping you'd come over for dinner next Friday. Just you. Something simple." Even now, her reaching out still stirred something in him, a reminder of how far they had come. He accepted without hesitation. When he arrived at their home the following week, he felt none of the old tension in his steps. No rehearsed speeches. No silent worries. Olivia opened the door with an easy smile, still cautious, but without the edge that once defined every interaction between them. "We're glad you came," she said as she stepped aside. The dinner was simple: roasted chicken, vegetables, fresh bread. Nothing extravagant, nothing competing with the holiday spreads Henry used to obsess over. And yet, it was one of the most peaceful meals he'd had in years. They talked about Jacob's work, Olivia's new project at the library, a show they were watching, and plans for the coming summer. There were no sharp glances. No unspoken resentments. No landmines hiding beneath small talk. At one point, Henry caught himself smiling at a story Jacob told. The realization hit him quietly. By stepping back, he hadn't lost his family. He had cleared enough space for them to step forward, to lead, to grow, and to welcome him into their lives, not just the life he had scripted for them. Driving home that night, Henry felt something settle in his chest, a kind of peace that came from knowing he had finally learned how to let others take the wheel. A few days later, Caroline stopped by, bright-eyed and carrying a bag of groceries. She set them down on the counter and turned to him with a smile. "You seem different, Dad," she said. "Lighter, happier." Henry chuckled. "Maybe I am." She reached for his hands, squeezing them gently. "I'm proud of you. Everything you've done these last few months, it's inspired me. Honestly. You could have dug in, refused to change, pushed everyone away. But you didn't. You chose to grow." Her words warmed him more deeply than she knew. Henry had spent so long believing age made people fixed, unmovable. But maybe age simply gave people more chances to choose who they wanted to be. Later that afternoon, as they drank tea at the kitchen table, Caroline asked about his plans for the upcoming summer. Henry paused, then smiled. "I think I want to spend more time with the grandkids," he said. "Not teaching them how to do everything the right way, just being there. Letting them come to me when they want stories, advice, help building something." Caroline grinned. "They'll love that, and you will too." He knew she was right. He had spent years holding on to guilt, guilt for past mistakes, guilt for lost time, guilt for the pain he hadn't meant to cause. But now, slowly, steadily, that guilt was loosening its grip, replacing itself with something gentler. Acceptance, understanding, hope. As the evening quieted, Henry found himself sitting alone outside on the porch as the sun dipped behind the horizon. The sky stretched wide and soft, streaked with lavender and gold. He listened to the distant sounds of neighbors chatting, dogs barking, wind rustling through the trees. For once, silence didn't feel isolating. It felt earned. His mind wandered through the last several months. The fight, the plate shattering on the floor, the apologies, the hard conversations, the rebuilding. It had been painful, humbling, transformative. And now, sitting there under the fading light, Henry realized something he had never allowed himself to understand. Letting go didn't make him weaker. Letting others lead didn't erase his place in the family. Stepping back didn't diminish his worth. If anything, it revealed a different kind of strength, one rooted in vulnerability, in trust, in the willingness to grow even when growth felt uncomfortable. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes as the cool evening air washed over him. For the first time in his life, Henry truly understood. Some chapters are written by holding on, but the most important ones begin when you finally learn how to let go. Several years passed in a way Henry never would have predicted back in those turbulent days. The sharp edges in the family had softened, not by accident but by continuous effort, small conversations, thoughtful choices, shared understanding. What once felt impossible had slowly, steadily turned into something beautiful. Healing had not come in a single moment. It had come in dozens of quiet ones. Now in his mid-70s, Henry found himself spending regular time with Olivia and Jacob, something that would have shocked him years earlier. They invited him over often, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine desire to include him. Sometimes they cooked dinner together. Sometimes they sat on the porch and talked about life. Sometimes they didn't talk much at all, just enjoyed the comfort of being around each other without tension. Their relationship had become something Henry treasured deeply, a bond built not on tradition or roles, but on mutual respect and earned trust. Olivia, once guarded and brimming with resentment, now greeted him with warmth. She had grown into her own space within the family, and Henry no longer took that growth personally. He encouraged it. He supported it. And she, in turn, had opened her heart in ways he never imagined possible. One quiet afternoon, Henry sat in Jacob and Olivia's backyard with Jacob at his side, watching the children run across the grass. Jacob nudged him lightly and said, "You know, Dad, I'm really grateful for the way things turned out." Henry smiled, "Me too." Jacob continued, "I didn't realize how much we all needed this peace. And I didn't realize how important it was for you and Liv to find your rhythm together. It changed everything." Henry turned to him, sincerity filling his voice. "I learned a lot from you, more than you know, from all of you." Jacob's eyes softened. "We learned from you too." Later that month, Henry and Tim found themselves sitting on the porch swing of Henry's home, watching the sun dip behind the trees the same way they had done so many years ago. But now, the conversation felt easier, gentle, reflective, grounded in love rather than unspoken frustration. "Funny, isn't it?" Tim said, leaning back. "How the hardest years ended up teaching us the most." Henry chuckled softly. "Life has a way of forcing you to learn, whether you want to or not." Tim nodded. "I'm glad you did, Dad. I know it wasn't easy for you to change, and I know I pushed you hard sometimes." Henry waved a hand. "You pushed me because you cared, and I needed it." He paused, voice low. "I learned a lot from you too, more than I ever told you. You helped me see things I'd been blind to." Tim smiled, the kind of smile that held years of shared history, good and bad. "We all grew up," he said, "even us grown men." Thanksgiving rolled around again, but this time it felt completely different. There was no tension hanging like fog in the corners of the house. No uneasy glances exchanged across the dinner table. No heaviness waiting to erupt. Instead, laughter filled the rooms. Olivia helped Maggie in the kitchen, the two of them chatting easily about recipes and family traditions. Jacob worked with Tim to set the table. Caroline entertained the kids with stories from her childhood, ones Henry had heard 1,000 times but never grew tired of. The house was alive. During dinner, Olivia raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice warm but steady. "To the kind that grows, changes, forgives, and keeps showing up." Everyone echoed the toast, their glasses clinking softly. Henry watched them all, his children, their spouses, his grandchildren, and a swell of emotion rose in him. Years ago, this same holiday had nearly torn them apart. Now, it was the holiday that proved how far they had come. He looked around the table, absorbing each smile, each laugh, each moment of connection. Pride blossomed quietly inside him. Not pride in being the head of the family, not anymore, but pride in having fought for this unity, in having been humble enough to change, in having learned that love is not about control, but about presence. The journey had been long, painful, humbling, transformative. But sitting there, surrounded by the people who mattered most, Henry understood something with absolute clarity. Every step had been worth it. Every mistake, every apology, every effort to rebuild. They had emerged on the other side, not perfect, not flawless, but united. A family healed. Another holiday season arrived, but this time, Henry felt none of the heaviness that once shadowed these gatherings. Instead, a quiet contentment settled in him as he walked through his home, taking in the sounds of laughter, soft music, and overlapping conversations. The house felt alive in a way he had only dreamed of years ago, warm, connected, whole. From the living room, Henry watched as Jacob and Olivia guided their children in hanging ornaments on the tree. Olivia gently handed a delicate snowflake ornament to her youngest, explaining its meaning, the same explanation Henry once recited to his own children decades earlier. Jacob stood beside her, steady and patient, smiling as the children tried to place things just right. It struck Henry then. They weren't just participating in family traditions. They were shaping them, owning them, carrying them forward, without being confined by the weight of his expectations. Instead of feeling replaced, Henry felt honored. His traditions hadn't died. They had evolved. Tim eventually joined him near the doorway, sipping a cup of cider. "You look peaceful," Tim said, nudging Henry lightly. "I am," Henry replied, "more than I've been in a long time." Tim nodded as they watched the family work together. "Funny, isn't it? We used to think legacy was about keeping everything the same, holding on tight, making sure nothing changed too much." Henry smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "Turns out legacy is letting things change, letting people grow, letting love be bigger than rules." Tim's expression softened. "Dad, we're both getting older. I think a lot about what I'll leave behind for my kids, what I want them to remember. And it's not the perfect holidays or the traditions. It's the way we showed up for each other, the way we forgave, the way we kept moving forward." Henry placed a hand on Tim's shoulder, steady and warm. "That's exactly it. I spent so many years thinking I had to keep the family glued together, but I realize now the real glue is love, forgiveness, understanding." As the afternoon flowed into evening, the family gathered around the table. Nothing extravagant, just a simple dinner filled with laughter and easy conversation. At one point, Olivia stood, clearing her throat gently. "Henry," she began, her voice steady, "I just want to say something." The table quieted. "When I joined this family, I didn't understand you. And I know you didn't understand me. We made mistakes, big ones, but you put in so much effort to change, to grow, to meet us in a new place. And because of that, we're here now, stronger, closer, happier." She exchanged a glance with Jacob, then continued, "Thank you for not giving up on us, for not giving up on me." Jacob nodded. "We're lucky to have you, Dad." Caroline reached across the table to squeeze Henry's hand. "You've taught us more in these last few years than you realize." Henry swallowed hard, emotion tightening in his chest. He looked around at the faces of the people he loved, each one shaped by time, by struggle, by growth. And in that moment, he finally understood. His legacy wasn't the traditions. It wasn't the house. It wasn't the authority he once clung to. His legacy was the love he learned to give, the patience he fought to develop, the humility he embraced, the second chances he offered and accepted. Later that night, after the dishes had been cleared and the children had drifted off to play, Henry stepped into the doorway of the living room and watched his family as they laughed together, trading stories that layered the past with the present. The fire crackled softly. The lights twinkled. The room glowed with warmth. He stood there in silence, feeling his heart swell with something deep and steady, peace, yes, but something more powerful too, fulfillment. He had spent so many years thinking his duty was to hold his family in place, but the truth was far simpler. His real purpose was to love them enough to let them grow, to lead them with compassion, to forgive and be forgiven, to build a home where healing was possible. And he had done that, imperfectly, slowly, painfully, but he had done it. As he watched his family, his legacy, gathered together, Henry felt a certainty settle within him. This love, this understanding, this unity would outlast him. It would echo in his children, in his grandchildren, in every future gathering built not on control, but on connection. Henry smiled, content. He had created a legacy not of tradition, but of love.